Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new pair of Ace in the Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we're going to be reviewing the premium German heavy fighter known as the TA-154A-1, coming to tier 3 and a battle rating of 4.3. To provide you all with a brief historical overview as to the TA-154 from its conception through to the A-1 subvariant, we begin thus. The spring of 1942 saw the escalation of the British Royal Air Force's night bombing offensive, peaking with the first 1,000 bomber raid on the night of May the 30th. 1,046 bombers targeted Cologne in what was known as Operation Millennium. The combined failure during this night of the German night fighter squadrons and ground anti-aircraft batteries to account for no more than 3.8% of the bombing force demonstrated to the Luftwaffe its need for new types of night fighter as soon as possible. Kurt Tank, lead designer at Focke-Wulf, was instructed to prepare a design for a two-seat night fighter that could meet the following requirements: have a combat operations flight time at 2.75 hours, have forward firing armament consisting of 4 30mm cannon or a combination of 20mm and 30mm cannon, and be primarily constructed of wood to preserve supplies of steel and light alloys. Tank submitted his design, the TA-211, in October of 1942. Despite its rapid approval, a number of senior officials within the Luftwaffe had their concerns, particularly around the proportion of the design which was made up of wood, which, in the case of the TA-211, was much larger than anticipated for a high-speed night fighter. However, the combat debut of the British heavy fighter, known as the de Havilland Moskito, a wooden airframe as well, in 1942, dispelled these worries due to the heavy fighter's combat success rate. As a result, the official night fighter contract was given to Focke-Wulf in November of 1942, and the design was redesignated TA-154 at Tank's request. This was to link the aircraft with its TA-152 and TA-153 fighter designs. Further design work was to continue, leading to a shoulder wing cantilever monoplane design consisting of a wooden fuselage covered in laminated plywood. The two crew members were protected by a 50mm armoured glass windscreen, 30mm armoured glass side panels, a 12mm armour plate in the forward bulkhead, and 8mm armour panels in the fuselage sides. The plane would be armed with two 20mm MG151 cannon, 200 rounds per gun, and two 30mm Mk108 cannon, 110 rounds per gun, forward firing in the fuselage sides. It was intended that the plane would be powered by a pair of Junkers-Jumo 213E liquid-cooled 1,750 horsepower engines, yet due to low numbers of available 213 engines, the first two prototypes were powered by the less powerful Junkers-Jumo 211R 1,350 horsepower engine. The first prototype, TA-154V1, underwent its inaugural flight successfully on the 1st of July 1943. The third prototype, powered by the 213 engines, TA-154V3, took flight for the first time successfully on the 25th of November 1943. Subsequent test performances showed that the plane had slightly weaker performance in flight compared to the two previous prototypes, and that was because the V3 prototype had all the night combat equipment installed, particularly the heavy radar sets. Therefore, despite the lack of performance compared to its predecessors, the Luftwaffe immediately placed the first production order for 250 TA-154A1s. The first production TA-154A1, which you're seeing on screen today effectively, flew for the first time at the start of June 1944. The second production aircraft followed soon after, but crashed on the 28th of June 1944, with its wing disintegrating mid-flight. It was quickly identified that the glue used to manufacture the wing had rotted the plywood joints. This problem had not been seen in the prototypes, which had used Goldman Tego film glue. Unfortunately, by chance, the Tego film glue factory in Wuppertal had been bombed by the RAF in late 1943, compromising the supply line of this vital glue. Further mid-flight air crashes and technical failures, not all in part due to the lack of glue, led to the suspending of the TA-154A1's production on the 14th of August 1944 indefinitely, meaning that only a total of no more than 50 TA-154s were ever produced, and they were never to see major combat service. And so, with our historical overview out of the way, let us take a look at how the TA-154A1 handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. Our first game of today takes place on the front line map for Tills. For this we'll be using the following setup. Air target belts for our 20mm cannon, the logic being that these belts consist 2/3 of high explosive incendiary tracer mine and Geschoss shells, which are extremely powerful against all types of foe. Add to that the universal belts for our 30mm cannon, which are 75% high explosive incendiary tracer mine and Geschoss shell, and we have a very potent combination. But moreover, we have the tracer on all of our high explosive incendiary shells from both belts, and this is important due to the differential in muzzle velocity of approximately 200 meters per second in the favour of our high muzzle velocity 20mm cannon. This means that longer engagement ranges, i.e. 500 meters plus, particularly when attacking a foe on the beam, you will see a difference in lead being required for your 20mm cannon versus your 30mm cannon, and with the lead indicator in game always accommodating the highest caliber weapon available, i.e. the 30mm cannon typically in the case of this aircraft, you may wish to adjust your lead accordingly to accommodate for your 20mm cannon, or alternatively use the tracer on your 30mm shells in order to accommodate the vertical drop of your 30mm cannon shell due to their lower muzzle velocity. So the tracer benefits you in being more accurate in my personal experience. Our gun convergence is set to 500 meters, as all of our armament is based around the centre of the fuselage and therefore is not convergence reliant, and our fuel load is set to 30 minutes as per the norm to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscathed on fuel capacity. Now this first match takes place where we're in the lower battle rating section of the match, i.e. this is a battle rating 5.0 match at a minimum based on the aircraft we're encountering. The importance of this is to demonstrate that when you are in the lower battle rating proportion of the match, the TA-154 can still do very well, and that is due to its speedy nature, as we're going to see with this Messerschmitt 19G following us, and the fact that we're able to use our great dive speed acceleration and overall speedy nature in order to frustrate them and never give them the chance to intercept us before we intercept their friendly bomber. We latch onto the Halifax at this point, and the Messerschmitt 19 notices we're going to try an interception. But coming in at a distance of 2 kilometers away, the Messerschmitt 19 is not going to catch us in time before we get to the bomber, and we only need one quick pass to bring the Halifax down, thanks to our armament as articulated at the start of this match. We close in the distance, opening fire at a kilometre, and we can see that over time we lead onto target and take the bomber out quickly for our first kill. Meanwhile, the Messerschmitt 19 is now 1.3 kilometres away from us, and we decide to go into a steep dive. Now if the Messerschmitt 19 wants to catch up to us, they'll need to follow us all the way down to the deck, but then they compromise their position in the higher altitude regions of the sky and throw everything they started with away, and they decide to break off accordingly. And this is the wonderful thing about the TA-154. Due to your speed and your ability to pick up so much speed in the dive, you're able to keep your foes at arm's length long enough to either cause them to break off, alternatively get back to friendly territory and have them ripped apart by your allies who converge in on the opponent's 6. As we break away at this point, we note that we use our good climb rate in order to get back up to altitude to intercept the next enemy bomber, in this case the enemy Halifax. Now the climb rate of the TA-154 in the context of its closer battle rating opposition is decent and competitive, being able to climb with the likes of the Typhoon Mark 1B Lade, the Spitfire F Mark 9 and the Yakovlev Yak 9U. But there are a number of planes below your battle rating which you'll see which will be able to outclimb you, the notable examples being the Messerschmitt 19 F4 and the P-63A King Cobra. Therefore do not take your climb rate as being an indicator that you can outclimb everything despite your attacker's spawn. But here we use our climb rate and our maximal engine power with war emergency power in order to climb roughly 2 kilometers to catch the Halifax right on the peak of our stall. And in doing so we see that we only need to graze them to rip off their right hand wingtip, and that'll be enough to cause them not to be able to bomb anymore as their plane flips over and they have to return to their airfield to repair. And that will pick us up another kill much later. And that serves to highlight firstly that your raw engine power combined with your war emergency power enables you to climb a lot of altitude if you need to in a dead vertical climb and intercept bombers who are right on the fringe. Alternatively, it also goes to show how powerful your armament is. We only needed a brief hit on the wing of that Halifax to take it off. But having levelled out, we now make our way towards an enemy PB4Y2. And what you're seeing as well is the fact that we've engaged targets all across the map so far, and will continue to do so, is that this is not an area defence heavy fighter. This is an interceptor that can crisscross the map, make journeys and go to the target at will. I mean, they're able to take down the enemy bomber before the enemy fighter, the Messerschmitt 19 F4, can catch up to our friendlies and catch up to us. And then going head to head, the F4 would not be able to survive with accurate fire from our own cannon, so they decide to be evasive and we dare not pursue. Now the reason we're not pursuing, i.e. turning around, is because of the poor turn fighting nature of the TA-154, and if that Messerschmitt 19 did want to turn fight with us, we put ourselves at an extreme disadvantage and make ourselves vulnerable to the threat. But more on that in a little bit. In the meantime we go for another reload, and it is worth noting that you have ample ammunition before going for reloads. 420mm cannon round backed up by 220 30mm cannon round. mean that reloads are infrequent, but when you do have to take them due to the high caliber of your weapon, you'll find that your reloads are long. A base reload of 60 seconds on your 30mm cannon, 40 seconds on your 20mm cannon, which is why what you're seeing here is a maxed out crew in terms of weapon reloading skill and expert crew as well, dropping our reload times to under half the base amounts. So I strongly advise you invest in that crew skill as soon as possible. Unfortunately, not getting any targets there in our boom and zoom pass, we decide to break off. What we can see is as we break out of our pass and begin to zoom climb back up, and we pick up our kill on the Halifax finally, the energy retention of the TA-154 in a straight line and coming out of boom and zoom passes is very strong. I mean, you're able to conserve a huge amount of your speed that you build up to the point it enables you to get away from the region of the sky that the furballs occurring or the encounters are happening, and pull enough distance to be back in safe territory for a good portion of time. This means that you're very hard to get a bead on in terms of where you're going to be next on the battlefield, as you can just dip in and out where necessary. But at this point, we go to show the turn fighting capabilities of the TA-154 being weaker, although we'd expect it perhaps because we're flying a heavy fighter at a reasonable battle rating. Our foe is a G55 coming in from above. They're coming in fast and we'll need to turn under them, otherwise they'll have a long shot on us with their 20mm cannon. We go nose down to build up a little bit more speed before turning underneath them, using our wide turn circle here to get underneath them before they can get a clear shot. Our friendlies are coming in, but we need to buy our friendlies a little bit more time. So instead of continuing to turn, we decide to go into a climbing spiral at this point to give the G55 a clear shot, at which point they'll need to provide themselves as a clear shot to our allies, and just as they're about to fire, our allies come in, particularly a Spitfire, and save the day. It was risky, but it goes to show how you can frustrate opponents into putting themselves in very disadvantageous positions, and we say thank you to our allies for saving our 6. Now, in taking some grazing fire from the 20mm cannon of the G55, it is worth noting immediately that the durability of the TA-154 is rather mixed. Your airframe, i.e. your fuselage, is strong and will be able to sustain damage. You're not going to find that your wingtips come flying off after a single hit. On top of that, your cockpit in particular is highly durable, and all my time flying this plane I never had a single pilot knockout, despite the fact that my crew only have the level 2 pilot vitality. They do not have it maxed out. On top of that, you have to consider the expert crew, but the point is the armour paneling around the cockpit will keep your pilots alive for a good amount of time, even in head-ons, as we'll see in the second gameplay of today. The antithesis, or the opposite of this durability, however, it comes in the form of the engines and the control surfaces. If the engines take damage, they will really pick up the damage fast, and if you end up on a single engine, you need to turn back and try and land in friendly territory or on your airfield as soon as possible, because this plane struggles to fly on a single engine, much like the historical counterpart did, from what I understand. Add to that the fact that your control surfaces, when hit, lose a good chunk of their performance, particularly the rudder, which when hit starts to wobble uncontrollably, and you'll find yourself having a difficult time at getting a precision shot on your foes, meaning that your experience goes from very enjoyable to rather dismal, unless you can accommodate for all the damage you've picked up. So getting hit in this aircraft is a bit of a mixture. If you take hits to the fuselage, you'll be fine. If your control surfaces are impacted or your engines are impacted, you're going to have a rough time. Therefore, we're hesitant to rush into engagements and put ourselves in vulnerable positions, and you'll see that time and time again in this match. But it's not keeping us out the fight for long periods of time, and if anything, we are quickly drifting back into the centre of the map or drifting into enemy territory and out of it as needs be, showing the flexibility you can have despite the fact we have a number of aircraft on the enemy team that are situated above us and have altitude dominance over our team. A Messerschmitt 19, for example, going to hunt off friendly bombers by looks of things. This means now we can begin to snap down and go for another boom and zoom pass, whereby we're going to chase the P-47. And we're now going to show how strong the dive speed acceleration of this plane is, whereby it is comparable to the likes of the Messerschmitt 19 you're going to face, the Focke-Wulf 190A4, etc. Although you're not going to be able to outdive the likes of higher battle rating opponents, such as the P-47M, and on top of that, the likes of the Tempest Vickers P, whereby these planes, albeit the Tempest Vickers P is practically the same battle rating as yourself, these planes will have slightly higher dive accelerations compared to your own, but not to the point where it's going to maul you to pieces, but instead it'll just be a slightly noticeable difference in dive speed acceleration that occurs over time. But there we're able to conduct a very tight turn to pursue the P-47, but we didn't feel confident in being able to get a clear shot without compromising any further speed, so we could just break off and get out of that engagement before anyone could get onto our 6. And that goes to show once again your superb building up a speed in a dive, and top of that your energy retention coming out of a boom and zoom pass. We go for a little bit more of a climb once again, trying to get some altitude over the centre of the map. And what is important to note at this point is that whilst you have strong dive speed acceleration, your maximal dive speed is not as strong as a good amount to your opposition. 911 km an hour sounds high, but when you consider a good number of the single-engine fighters that you're going to be facing have maximal dive speeds heading towards 1000 km an hour, for example on the Messerschmitt 19 G2 it heads slightly above 1000 km an hour from what I recall in test flights, and what you'll find is that when you go to the most extreme dive speeds you will be outrun by foes, and that really becomes pronounced when you see Battle Rating 5.0 opposition. But over shorter to medium dives, you'll be able to match your foes to pace very easily. But it's just one consideration you need to have on the most extreme dives. But here, going into a dive, we go into our final boom and zoom pass of the game, firstly switching for a head-to-head against the LA-5F, taking them apart very quickly, and then converging on this VB-10C1, who's trying to pursue our friendly Spitfire, switching to the BTD-1, but they're never going to get there to get a clean shot, as we rip them out of the sky for our race in a day. And now begin to break away once more, in a gentle dive at first, but gradually levelling out and pulling the distance once more, while the MS-406C1 going after one of our friendlies and not after us. We're continuously checking our 6, both behind and above, to make sure that nobody's trying to get close to us and rip us apart right at the end of the match. We go for another reload, using our time off from engagements to reload our ammunition, but it won't be necessary because the game's practically at an end. What we can see is through our evasive nature throughout this match and using the overall speed of this aircraft, we've survived and been able to deal with a higher battle rating game, as we now go to our post-game stats. With our 5 kills, we're able to pick up 20,126 Silver Lions and 3,530 research points. Thus far then, in the first game, we have seen that the TA-154 A-1 handles itself very well as a bomber interceptor and roamer over the course of a given battle, even when it is in the lower battle rating end of the matchup. Therefore, do not be afraid when you're put in such games where you're up against higher battle rating opposition, because you can use your speed and your straight line energy retention to be able to frustrate your foes as they pursue you. And if they become desperate enough, they will follow you all the way back to friendly territory, as we saw on one occasion today, and get ripped apart by your allies, with you providing enough time for your allies to get a clean shot on target. That does not take anything away from the firepower of the aircraft, nor its ability to handle itself in a given matchup, where typically you'll want to engage foes in a head-on if they are roaming around at roughly the same altitude as yourself. And you will find that at the start of matches in general, as you climb to altitude, you'll be at say 5,000 meters altitude at the same time as the majority of your fighter opposition, if not slightly below the best climbers at your battle rating tier, if not the higher battle rating planes you'll face. Therefore, do not expect things to come easily, but in handling situations accordingly, you can find success, as we've just seen. Now our second game is going to show us when we are at the top of the battle rating spectrum of a given match, and how the situation is rather the same, whereby there will be those foes who are able to meet you head on in the first instance. But it's in those kinds of engagements where you can really use the TA-154 A-1 to assert altitude dominance and really rack up the damage against the enemy team. So let's get into it. Our second and final game of today takes place on the ground strike map Deadly Dune. For this we'll be using the same setup as before and opening with the same tactic of climbing as high as we can and going head to head with our foes if the odds are looking equal or favourable. Preferably going head to head in 1 versus 1s rather than a chain of us cutting through multiple foes when close distance to one another coming towards us, using our firepower to our greatest possible advantage. As we gain altitude, it's worth talking about the control surfaces of this aircraft, whereby your roll rate in particular is your strongest control surface, are your ailerons. There is a lock-up between 650 to 750 km an hour in which you will lose 20% of your roll rate. But considering that your roll rate to begin with is comparable to the likes of the Fokker 490 A4, which is the Fokker fighter at your battle rating, and you'll find that your roll rate is superb even when it starts to lock up, meaning that you have great rolling capability in those high-speed boom and zoom passes. Add to that your decent elevator, which has a wide looping circle but in general is responsive, and you will find that the lock-up threshold for that is between 700 and 800 km an hour, losing 25% of its performance. Again, not too much of an issue, meaning you can pull out those high speed dives with ease. The only downside in terms of controllability is in terms of your rudder, which is extremely poor, has a very wide, flat rudder turning circle, and means it's preferable to avoid using the rudder at all costs, apart from when you're engaging in a standard rollover and then pull up on the elevator turn, at which point you'll use the rudder to kick you around a little bit faster. And your rudder locks up between 600 and 700 km an hour, losing 50% of its capability. Now in the meantime of that discussion, we took out the P-39Q Aerocobra in a head-to-head, avoiding the incoming fire once they've been knocked out from their smouldering wreck. And we're carrying on momentum through here against the French bomber ahead of us, noticing the Messerschmitt 19 F4 behind us, and we'll be going after them very shortly once we've got rid of this dangerous enemy bomber. We can see here how our straight line acceleration enables us to get up to a good speed quickly and bear down on this opponent, despite the fact they are rather slow to begin with, while that being a rather low battle rating bomber from what I recall. For reference, your straight line acceleration from your stall speed of 170 km an hour up to 425 km an hour is decent on engine power alone. It becomes extreme when you integrate more emergency power and you kick this threshold up to 550 km an hour, meaning that if you do need to get somewhere fast and your base acceleration isn't good enough, engaging your emergency power is really going to get you fast. But do keep in mind that there are a number of fighters that can out-accelerate you around your battle rating, the key example being the P-63A-10 King Cobra. Now here we go head to the Messerschmitt 19 F4, smashing apart their fuselage with a critical hit in the head-to-head, and then cutting through their left-hand wing from their perspective before they collided with us to pick up the kill. That was an extremely close one, but we could bear down them with our superior firepower there and use our high-speed manoeuvrability to make sure we had the clear shot on target when it mattered. And what we can see here is that there is a theme having achieved altitude dominance, whereby so long as you've got your speed up, you can do anything you want with this plane. Apart from, of course, turn fight, but in terms of the things you'd want to do, i.e. the interceptions and the boom and zoom passes. Which is why when asked what is the ideal speed range for this plane, I would personally have to recommend 400 km an hour plus, and the only upper threshold I put on it is the maximal dive speed of 911 km an hour, because the lockup thresholds on this aircraft are not punishing. If you exclude the rudder, which you're not going to be using typically anyway, apart from changing the precision of your shots slightly, you'll find that the lockups at higher speed, i.e. the 20% on your roll rate and 25% on your elevator, do not compromise your ability to be aggressive and engage foes at the most extreme speeds, i.e. 800 km an hour plus. Therefore you're not punished for going too fast, unlike in a good number of the fighters and the heavy fighters that you've flown to date and around the battle rating of this plane. We bear down on the enemy Wellington here, ripping them apart for another kill, very quickly dispatching them and then breaking off before going head to head with the enemy B-25, which with its laden nose of 50 caliber machine guns would rip us apart. Now you may be wondering at this point, why am I not hammerheading over on the enemy Spitfire? Well, I'm about to demonstrate how poor the rudder is for the hammerhead. We can see how long it's taking to even get the plane orientated 90 degrees perpendicular to our foe. At which point the foes already come out of their stall and we decide to level out instead and finish off a flat rudder turn, which itself is rather slow and clumsy. Going to show how poor the rudder is. Therefore, sitting up at 5,500 meters altitude and slowly declining right now, if we have to talk about an altitude limit to combine with our ideal speed range, it is worth noting that your ideal altitude range is between 1,000 and 6,500 meters altitude. The logic here being that you do not want to be all the way down to ground level because there is a small drop off in engine performance below 1,000 meters altitude, and there is a significant drop off in engine performance above 7,000 meters altitude. But between those 2 points, you'll find that you're at your maximum performance in terms of your engine power and your controllability, only putting it between 1,000 and 6,500, so that way you have some room to manoeuvre, i.e. an excess of say 500 meters to go above your ideal threshold and 1,000 meters to dive down below your ideal threshold to get away from your pursuers. Now what we haven't talked about is what happens at low speeds, and what you find below 325 km an hour in this aircraft, the control surfaces become antagonisingly heavy, which means that you already feel as though you're hitting your stall characteristics as early as 275 km an hour, well before your stall speed of 170. On top of this, this means that your turn circle, which is already extremely wide, becomes exacerbated and means that turn fighting becomes an absolute nightmare, perhaps something we didn't explain as much in the first gameplay as we thought we had. Which is why I strongly advise avoiding turn fighting wherever possible. The only time you want to turn with someone is for that first turn when you're at 500 km an hour, for example, where you can snap round towards the foe if they're still flying in a straight line. Beyond that, you want to disengage if you're getting too close and being baited into a turn fight before your speed drops away and you lose all of the energy you've built up. Because as we said earlier, energy retention in a straight line and the vertical for this plane is good, but when you go into the horizontal and start turn fighting, you bleed energy very quickly. So the summation of it all is that of course you have very powerful interceptor capabilities and you have very strong boom and zoom capabilities. But we haven't really demonstrated how powerful the boom and zoom is yet. So let's demonstrate now, where we're diving down on the enemy team as they're all heading in towards the centre of the map, starting with this Yak 19 who seems to be gradually climbing for altitude. We'll rip them apart, and now we're going to carry our momentum through on a number of foes, showing how powerful the firepower on this plane is and how controllable it is at high speed, increasing thanks to the brilliant dive speed acceleration. Heading towards the Sea Hurricane Mark 1 at first, we decide to break off because they're heading at quite a bit of speed and instead go for a less suspecting foe, this Junkers 87D. Closing the distance, we open fire, ripping them apart for another kill, before converging on the Spitfire Mark 5B Trop, taking them apart, and then carrying through to finish off on this P47D hopefully. If not, we'll go for a different one instead. Picking up a triple kill in the process, and wrapping our game up with 9 kills in total. And now just breaking away at 650 km an hour, declining thanks to our great energy retention, knowing that there's no threat on our 6 and we can live to fight another day with no additional damage incurred to our airframe, unlike the engagements earlier on in this match. And that is the summation of your boom and zoom capabilities and the performance of this plane, that it can cut right through the centre of the battlefield and rip its foes to pieces. With the capable armament it has, as we now go to our post-game stats once more. With our 9 kills, we're able to pick up 4,602 research points and 42,412 silver lions. To defeat the TA-154A-1 in a given matchup then, I can recommend one particular approach for all fighters and heavy fighters that engage it, and that is to turn fight with this plane. Reason being, the turn circle of this aircraft is already rather large, and it is only made worse when the plane's speed drops below 325 km an hour, or its control surface is becoming heavy, and therefore the pilot will typically have to start levelling the plane out or risk heading towards a stall at a rapid rate. On top of that, if you can cause the turn fight to occur below 2,000 meters altitude, this will give the TA pilot less room to be able to dive away and try to run away from you, or extend the dogfight back into friendly territory and put you at threat of friendly fighters, i.e. from the TA's perspective, of engaging you and getting them off their 6. But by avoiding such circumstances today, we're able to demonstrate how the TA-154A1 makes her an absolutely brilliant heavy fighter when it comes to the role of hit and run tactics, particularly against enemy bombers, but that can be extended to enemy fighters as well. Being able to charge across the skies in level flight thanks to its brilliant straight line acceleration and ability to hold speed well, and on top of that its brilliant boom and zoom characteristics, whereby if anything it's a Focke-Wulf 190A4, i.e. the battle rating 4.3 fighter, but with greater high speed control ability and an equivalent roll rate, and superior firepower to add to that, meaning that you can tear foes apart very quickly and follow them on their courses through the sky as you come down on them, crushing them completely. Therefore, if you had to ask me, would I recommend purchasing the TA-154A1 if the opportunity arose, I would definitely say yes if you're looking for a heavy fighter that's able to just roam around the skies and take on any situation at will, being able to frustrate those that pursue it, but at the same time turn the tables on those who underestimate it. And if anything, when I now think of heavy fighters in War Thunder, I'll definitely be thinking first and foremost about the Marvellous Moskito. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.